Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charles Shapiro, President of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. Our program today is the border crisis from Trump to Biden, and our guest is Alan Bersin, former Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection and former Assistant Secretary for International Affairs in the Department of Homeland Security. This program is brought to you by you, the members of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. If you're not a member, please join because we need your support. I want to welcome two of our board members who are on the program today in the call, Allison Padilla-Goodman and Sam Owens, and former U.S. Ambassadors Hattie Babbitt, who was Ambassador to the OAS, and Lisa Kubisky, who was U.S. Ambassador to Honduras. At about 12:30, we'll start taking questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So click on that and you will be able to submit your question. Please keep them short, makes them easier for me, and please use your name. If you submit them anonymously, I won't use them. Alan Bersin, whom I first met when I worked at the University of California, San Diego, is a senior advisor in the law firm of Covington and Burling in Washington, D.C. He is the inaugural senior fellow in the Homeland Security Project at the Belfer Center at the Kennedy School at Harvard. He's a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars and is chair of BorderWorks Group, a consulting firm. In the Obama administration, Bersin was the U.S. Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection and served as Assistant Secretary for Policy and International Affairs at Homeland Security. His career also includes, he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California. He was also the Attorney General's Southwest Border Representative. It was called the Border Czar at the time. He's been the California Secretary of Education, the Superintendent of Schools in San Diego, and Chairman of the San Diego Airport Authority. Received his AB from Harvard College. He was a Rhodes Scholar, and he's a graduate of Yale Law School. And here's a little known fact, and I think this is accurate. Alan was an offensive guard on the Harvard football team in 1966-67 and is in the Harvard Athletic Hall of Fame. So welcome, Alan, and tell me, is that true?
It is, Mr. Ambassador, and but that was about 7 or 8 people ago. So I hardly recall the 50 pounds that I've lost in the 50 years that have gone by, but it was a true statement.
Well, welcome. It's a pleasure having you with us today, and I know you've got some slides that you want to go through real quickly. But let me ask you just a couple of questions first. Are we and the world facing an unending series of immigration crises? I mean, it seems to be the case, and why is that? What's going on?
So the first, I'm happy to use the slides as they come up, either in response to your questions, Charles, or the audience. So we don't have to take time on a slide deck. But your question is, will we see this? Is what we're seeing now and have seen over the past few years a part of a new normal? And actually, we've seen the movement of people around the globe for a long, long time. What marks the modern and the contemporary era from the past, when we look, after all, it was the Puritans who came on the Mayflower. It was the Arab migrants who settled the Middle East from the Arabian Peninsula. So we've seen the movement of people. What distinguishes today, I think, is the technology. So this is all compressing time and space, and the communication vehicles mean that people are on the move. They learn about other places on the globe in the way that hadn't been possible in the past, and they move. And we've seen that reflected in the numbers. So in 1970, we had 84.5 million people on the move: immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and that's grown last year to 281 million. So wow. An increase of 3.5 times in a 50-year period. This involves now, though, 3.6% of the Earth's population on the move. And we shouldn't expect that this is going to this is going to stop. The awareness of what else is going on in the world, the ability of someone sitting in a rural village somewhere on the planet has access to what's going on in Sao Paulo and New York and Paris and Beijing. So we're going to see people on the move, and this is going to be complicated, of course, by climate change. As we see more and more areas devastated by extreme weather events, this is going to force people out, and frankly, the political instability that's now prevalent in the world will lead to conflict zones like Iraq and Syria with greater frequency, I fear, and that's going to put people on the move. So the short answer to your question is this is consistent with the past, but completely different in terms of scale and scope.
One of my sons thinks we should just have open borders like we did in the 19th century, that anybody who gets here should be allowed to stay here. Why would you turn them away, and wouldn't we be a better country for it?
Well, a little like real estate, location in history means everything. In the 19th century, the United States was still really bringing the West into the national orbit. There was plenty of room, and there was an attitude of welcome. And in the United States, our politics has swung periodically from welcoming immigrants to pulling up the ladder and being very harsh on immigrants. We've seen this pendulum swing back and forth. But the fact of the matter is, and the answer to your son is, this is no longer a circumstance where we can have open borders, where we really can't either politically or economically accommodate an open border that permits anyone, particularly given my answer to your first question, that gives anyone the right to come into the country and remain here, no matter how irregular or illegal the entry was.
Earlier, you mentioned refugees, asylum seekers, immigrants. What's the difference? I mean, just technically, and under law, international law, U.S. law, what's the difference?
Well, it's a combination of both definitions under international law and domestic jurisprudence in depending on the country you're in. So it really goes to the intention and the condition of the person on the move. So an immigrant is someone who is either irregularly, legally, or illegally on the move from one country to the next. In the case of refugees, you're dealing with mostly being pushed out of their current home by violence or persecution, and while they may have an idea of where they'd like to end up as a destination country, that's not the main point of the refugee status. And then asylum and refugee, at least in the past, were typically the same. The difference was where you claimed it. Refugees applied for status in refugee status in their own countries or outside the country they were seeking to move to. And asylum seekers typically claim status or the need for protection at the borderline or within the country.
So when they show up, they're not en route anymore, but they've showed up and they ask for asylum status.
Correct.
Okay. Unauthorized border crossings have dropped during the Trump administration and have surged under the Biden administration. I mean, doesn't that lead you to conclude that the Trump administration was following the right policy?
No, in fact, it took President Trump, for all of his anti-migrant and immigrant rhetoric, it took President Trump almost 2 years to get control of the situation. In the first year, the numbers of people trying to come illegally into the country went down, based largely on the rhetoric and the anti-immigrant sentiment that was so much a part of the campaign and President Trump's first year in office. By the second year, in 2018 and going into 2019, migrants, intending migrants and smugglers who were assisting them had discovered that there was really a lot of bluff and bluster rather than any real effort of control. And in fact, the same thing that had worked at the end of the Obama administration, that is claiming asylum, getting to the country, claiming asylum, that the process remained broken so that once you claimed asylum and passed the preliminary threshold examination, which is called a credible fear test, you were actually paroled into the country and given a notice to appear in an immigration court hearing when your full petition would be adjudicated. The problem was that because of the backlog in the immigration courts, now more than 1 million cases, the court appearance date was 2, 3, or 4 years in the future, and many people never showed up. But the law, as it's been written in a bipartisan way, permits people to be paroled into the country, to wait for their hearing, and to have the ability to work, so they have perfectly legal status. Well, this is a huge hole that permits, and as I say, it started at the end of the Obama administration, this abuse of the asylum system, or taking advantage of it, but it continued into the Trump administration because nobody went to fix it. It's still not fixed as we meet here today. In any case, the numbers rose so high during the second year of the Trump that 144,000 people showed up at the U.S. borders in May of 2019. And then action was taken not to deal with the problem at the borderline, but to deal with it in the sending countries and in Mexico. And President Trump threatened Mexico with tariffs, and Mexican enforcement started. But we're back now in a situation where the messages were not anti-immigrant, but they're actually were welcoming words from the Biden administration during the campaign and now. And we've seen the result with more than 200,000 people actually showing up at the border last month.
In a month, 200,000.
Yes, yes.
Wow. Wait, and on what basis can someone apply for asylum? I mean, you said a well-founded fear of what? I mean, that the government is going to persecute me, that my neighbor is going to shoot me,
So this, yeah.
that my farm is dried up because there's not enough rain.
Right. So the definition is variable. It's changed, but basically the notion is persecution, subjected to reasonable fear of persecution, traditionally and historically, because of political persecution or religious persecution. That was expanded in past years during the Obama administration to also include domestic violence, sexual abuse, and gang violence, particularly in the in the Central American countries of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, where the gang presence is a clear and present danger. But the idea is that you come to the borderline. You get processed by Customs and Border Protection or Immigration Customs Enforcement. You claim asylum, and you then are given a preliminary examination called the credible fear test. And it's a relatively low standard under the congressional enactment. And basically, about 70+% of the people who come to the border are found to pass the credible fear test, and then they're permitted into the country. And many who are permitted into the country never show up for their hearings 2, 3, or 4 years downstream. But those who do, 75% of those who go before an immigration court judge are denied asylum in the United States and are then removed from the country. So you have this broken asylum system, part of a larger broken immigration system, but the asylum system has been exploited by tens of thousands of people who are, look, let me tell you, even though I've been in the enforcement business and every one of these immigrant stories pulls at your heart. Every one of these is a sympathetic case, but the fact is that you can't use the asylum system to redress every human misfortune in the world. And you also can't permit the asylum system to be exploited by economic migrants. That is, people who are like my grandmother 125 years ago, came to this country seeking a better life for her family. But you can't permit people seeking a better life for their families to do so on the basis of an asylum claim. And that's part and parcel of the reason why we need a comprehensive immigration reform, which unfortunately in the polarized political environment we have today is not going to happen. But perhaps we could fix the asylum system. There should be sensible people on both sides of the aisle that recognize that the current situation is not sustainable.
Good luck with that. I mean, a couple more questions to sort of set this up. We sent your paper to everybody who registered for the program. Or if they'd registered yesterday, we sent it to them because it's a long paper and takes a while to read and very useful. But one of the things your paper says is that border walls don't work. I mean, we built in San Diego, there's a wall that appears to work pretty darn well. Why don't walls work? And why aren't we building, completing the wall across the 2,100 miles of our border with Mexico?
So actually, I'm not against the wall strategically placed. I was referring to this idea of what President Trump referred to as this big, beautiful wall from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, a 2,000-mile wall like the Great Wall of China that would have cost $50+ billion and frankly wouldn't have accomplished the purpose. But walls have a real place and fences, but they have to be designed for the particular location. So in fact, in the 1990s, the first wall was built during the Clinton administration. I supported that effort in order to help direct the flow of migrants so that Border Patrol agents would not be chasing people into the city, but you could actually control where they would attempt to cross illegally. And in each part of the border, Ambassador Shapiro, there is a place for a certain type of wall, except out, of course, in the Sonoran Desert in Arizona or in the Big Bend area in Texas. I mean, you don't need walls there, but in desert areas in East San Diego County or in East Central Texas and West Texas, you put Normandy barriers. You want to block trucks coming with large numbers of people or large numbers of drugs. And that there have been 700 miles of border barriers put up, and they are functioning very well. So this, frankly, the Trump border wall, which really grew out of a suggestion to him from Roger Stone that he talk about the big, beautiful wall to remind him how important immigration would be to the campaign effort, has been a distraction because they only really built 7 new miles of wall. The rest of it, I think, was necessary work in rebuilding and reconstructing and refurbishing border barriers that professionals, Border Patrol agents and experts had decided, here's what we need here, here's what we need there. That's the brief on walls.
Okay, and finally, we all saw these photos this morning in the papers of Haitians in Del Rio, Texas, at the border. What are Haitians doing there? I mean, who are these people crossing the border? I mean, traditionally, it's Mexicans, and then you talked earlier about Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, the northern triangle of Central America. I mean, who's coming to the border? Who are these people?
So this is a great case study of where the system breaks down in a variety of ways and why you can't deal with immigration at the borderline. You've got to deal with it as far away geographically as possible and as far away and as early in time before they arrive at the border. So how did 13,000 Haitians end up in Del Rio, Texas? So maybe, and I'll show you to say this isn't the first time this kind of thing has happened. Let me ask Henna if she can put slide 7 and then start with slide 8, if you would, and then slide 7. And I'll talk through them if I might, Charles,
Sure.
on the answer. So how did Haitians end up at the border? Well, in fact, after the 2010, yeah, there we go. That's what it looks like. This is El Paso in 2019, before the Trump administration actually effectively dealt with the issue in Mexico. This is what it looks like in Del Rio now, except that the migrants, rather than being Central American, are Haitian. You say, well, how did Haitians end up under that bridge this week? And the answer is that in 2010, most of these Haitians actually haven't come from Haiti. They did originally, but they're coming up from South America, from Chile or Brazil. And how they got in Chile and Brazil was that they were driven out of their country by the 2010 earthquake that was so devastating in that Caribbean nation. And they migrated, and the Brazilians took them in to help build as construction workers, among other things, aside from helping out refugees, genuine refugees, to build the Olympic facilities in Brazil that were coming up. Well, what happened, and those Haitians, thousands of them have remained, and some migrated from Brazil to Chile and other places in South America. But what they're doing now, because of the recent announcement by the Biden administration extending the so-called temporary protective status to Haitians, many Haitian families determined now's the time to come to the United States. And because the message has gotten out that you could get into the country on a claim of asylum, they've hired the smugglers they needed to do to come up through South America, along the Pacific coast, through Colombia, through Panama, in the Gulf of Darien, and then they've come up to Mexico. And the Mexicans, who have been cooperating with the United States since the Obama administration in managing migratory flows, actually had forewarned the Biden administration that they would not be able to detain Haitians, because unlike Central Americans who can be returned to countries that are on the borders of Mexico, land borders of Mexico, there would be no way to return Haitians to Haiti. And that's why they were permitted to move through Mexico and to come up into Texas, where they are now being flown by the United States back to Haiti. I mean, the reaction to this scene is that the Biden administration, that has been on again, off again, with mixed messages, has now been very firm through Secretary Mayorkas that all the Haitians who are coming will be expelled under the public health regulations of Title 42 that are in existence, and they're going to be flown back to Haiti. But let me just make this other point. If you go to the earlier slide, Hannah, the one before that, I'd like the audience to see, here are Central Americans. This is again comparable to what's happening this week in Del Rio. You'll see the circled Border Patrol agent car at the head of the line. Well, the point to be made here is the broken asylum system. Migrants who are trying to come into the country do not try to avoid Border Patrol agents today. They are trying to find them so that they can claim asylum and initiate the process that I described before. This is a complete paradigm change, and I think the great indicator that we need to fix this asylum system. And yes, I agree, comprehensive immigration reform is off the table, but this is intolerable. And both parties have gone through this. This scene comes from the Trump administration. You have a similar scene playing itself out in Del Rio under the Biden administration. Let's fix this tremendous hole in the system.
Okay, so you've described the problem.
Thanks, Anna. We can take that slide down. Yeah.
Yeah. How do we fix the problem? I mean, you're
So
Worked on it, you offer
yeah.
some solutions. How do we solve this?
Yeah, no, I never, I like you, I've been in government too long to rail at the problem and not have an idea, even if, as my wife says, he's often wrong but never uncertain, in the way I propose it. But the fact is that we need to fix the asylum system. Say, well, how do you fix it? Asylum should not, we need to change the law so that we are not providing an incentive for people to come up to the borderline, to the Chihuahua, Texas border, or the Coahuila or the Tamaulipas, Texas border, and claim asylum there. We have to provide opportunities for migrants to claim asylum in their country, and there to be safe zones that are guaranteed by the United States and other countries in North America that would guarantee the safety of people while they're waiting for their petition to be adjudicated. In effect, what you do is conflate the refugee process, which has always been applied for abroad, with the asylum process. You provide a safe zone, and you make sure that these petitions are not adjudicated 2, 3, and 4 years later, but adjudicated immediately. And during the Obama administration, there was something called the CAMS program that's been reinstituted now. And this is administered by the State Department. Well, the difficulty is that it was taking 2 years for the State Department to process the petitions. And you can't compete with smugglers who were telling you, I'll if you pay me the $10,000 or $11,000, I'll get you to the border. I'll give you 3 chances to get across, but you'll basically be able to line up in one of these lines, claim asylum, and then you'll be paroled into the country. That's the break. You've got to make this away from the borderline, and you've got to make it a process that works efficiently and effectively. And what you'd see if you did that was that people who are entitled to asylum, who are now often lost in the sea of people who are not entitled to asylum, claiming it, would actually get the protection that they deserve. And we create a disincentive to the use of smugglers to come up to the borderline, which is what we're actually encouraging right now by the hole in our policy.
Okay, we're getting questions coming in from the audience. Let me encourage the rest of y'all, please send them in. Again, don't use chat. Please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Barbara Gray asks, you suggested refugee camps. Why aren't they in Mexico? Why aren't they further away from the border? I mean, why are they in Del Rio, Texas?
Well, this is because the way the system works now and the way it can be exploited and is to come to the border, get arrested or detained by a Border Patrol agent, claim asylum, and then go through the process as it's currently constituted. This is the point. We need to change the system so that it's done away from the border. Now, the Trump administration, it actually is part of the action they took in 2019 that led to the decrease, was the so-called migration protection protocols, which said you claim it at the border, but you will not be paroled into the country to wait for your hearing. Instead, you have to wait outside. That was revoked by the Biden administration. Now a federal judge has ordered them to reinstate it. Again, which I understand the reasoning there, and it is consistent with this idea of not permitting people to come into the country if they don't have asylum to then fade into the population. So, but the point is, we can't be going on these pendulums. We can't have a pendulum that swings violently. That's not the way to conduct a policy. But I take your point. We should have safe zones in Central America, places like Sotocano in Honduras, or in southern Mexico, near their center in Tapachula, where people will be able to be protected, but get their claims adjudicated, not in 4 years or 2 years, but in, within 90 to 120 days, you get a decision made by a Citizenship and Immigration Service official.
Laura Dawson asks, you make the point that migration management is not just a U.S. border issue, but a broader systemic issue. And she asked, how can Canada and Mexico support U.S. efforts to manage migration flows?
Yeah, in two very specific ways, Laura, and I take the point of the question. Today, given globalization and given the way in which time and space are compressed, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, you cannot manage your border unilaterally. In the same way, the U.S. cannot manage its southern border without cooperation with Mexico, nor can it manage its northern border with Canada without the cooperation with Canada. And even more than that, we need a regional approach to this asylum system. We need countries taking responsibility jointly for the protection of people who are genuinely in need of asylum status. And then they need to be settled in a variety of countries, not just the U.S. Canada's traditionally had a huge welcome mat for refugees. So one, help fix the asylum system, both becoming a source for people who need protection, but also setting up the processes that would make this a regional approach rather than a unilateral approach. And then the second is actually to deal with the conditions in the sending countries, in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, the so-called northern central countries. These are countries in which people are being pushed out by violence, by poverty, by weather events, by persecution. And frankly, the Biden administration has made a big point appointing Vice President Harris as the chief liaison to start working on the push factors, so-called. But these take a generation to deal with. This is not going to happen in the short term. And the pretensions to the contrary are actually destructive. But here's a place where North America, acting as the core countries of North America, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, can actually lead the effort, both in restoring citizen security and helping the so-called Northern Triangle countries get on their feet, first by ensuring stability, and then by doing it, by building the basis for economic investments by the private sector. That's another multilateral regional approach.
And nation building is not exactly a policy that's very popular in the United States right now.
Yeah. And it certainly can't be done unilaterally. Enough. We've seen it in Vietnam. We've seen it in Iraq. We've seen it in Afghanistan. That's why the answer to Laura's question is it cannot be done unilaterally by the U.S., but regionally, by creating a multilateral capacity to accomplish this, which is not typically the case in a world where nation states do not like to give up their sovereign power. But it seems to me that those are the two areas where I think North America can act as a unity.
Jerry Purvis asks, how can we, the U.S., create zones in, whether it's in Mexico or Honduras or wherever, without the cooperation of those countries? I mean, how do, we don't want to set up military zones in southern Mexico. My goodness.
We can, but this is the follow-on to the answer to Laura's question. Mm-hmm. This is why we need to have regional efforts and bilateral efforts. And in fact, bilaterally with Mexico, this issue has been co-managed by the two countries since the first crisis from Central America, which were unaccompanied minor children in 2014, 2015. Secretary Johnson worked hand in hand with Mexico to actually build a situation where Mexico was working to enforce its border that worked to the benefit of the U.S. And then Secretary Johnson worked with Central American countries to take back migrants who would made their way to the border. This is not about doing it unilaterally. The point is you cannot do it unilaterally in a global age. So yes, you have to work with Mexico, but Mexico has a real interest in working migration. It cannot have hundreds of thousands of people roaming through its country in a disorderly way on the way to the U.S. And frankly, the three Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, particularly the last two, they need to start being assisted with a firm hand because, in fact, they cannot protect their people who are fleeing. And, they are sovereign states, but they are quasi-states, and they will need real support from Canada, Mexico, the United States, and other countries to deal with the problems they can't themselves deal with.
A retired judge, Dorothy Beasley, asks, it's a great idea to change the asylum system to allow people to apply outside the U.S. But what do we do with that huge backlog of people? What did you say? There's 1 million people backed up in the system. What in the world's with that? How do we solve that?
So the immigration court deals not only with asylum petitions, of which there are now hundreds of thousands pending from the backlog of the last years, but also with other immigration questions, as the judge knows, benefits and family reunification and the like. What we would have to do, in my judgment, is first take the immigration court, which is now still in the Department of Justice, and either make it an independent agency or make it part of an intergovernmental arrangement that would bring in people that could process this on a crash basis. I'm talking it's going to take 2 or 3 years, but to make summary decisions, to work through standards, to work through rules that can then be applied so that we can bring this immigration court docket down. But the largest number of new cases on the docket are actually come out of this broken asylum system. So I think hand in hand, you've actually got to do this offshore processing. You've got to change the nature of the asylum process, and that will do a lot to remove the problems, the backlog in the immigration court. But yes, we definitely have to dispose of and deal with, adjudicate fairly hundreds of thousands of asylum cases. And I think, as the judge knows, there have been judicial crises before. They can be organized and effectively resolved in a way that is just and fair to the individual petitioner.
Hattie Babbitt asks, and a number of other people have variations on this question, is what can we learn from European efforts, both good and bad, to manage migration from Africa and the Middle East?
Yeah, so the Europeans, Ambassador Babbitt, as you may have noticed, if you had a chance to look at the recent paper that it was circulated, Europe hasn't done such a marvelous job at all in its own right. What they ultimately did, much as President Trump threatened Mexico to stop the flow in 2019, and now again there are efforts in Mexico that are not quite stopping the flow as effectively. In Europe, President Erdogan was essentially given $3 billion by the EU to stop people from coming from Turkey across the Mediterranean, across the Balkans into Europe. And then again, but the problem has never really been confronted with the maritime smuggling from Libya that's continuing across the Mediterranean to Italy. In effect, the European Union has created a strengthened Frontex, which is their perimeter border patrol, analogous to ours, but they've just started that process of strengthening. So in many ways, Europe is, like the United States, been overwhelmed by these flows of migrants, and will need to actually work to solve their asylum issues. Their Dublin Accords that governed asylum broke down under the pressure of the migration in 2015-16. So Europe and the United States have problems that are similar but different by context, and we can learn from one another. But mostly in the asylum area, I think we need to work out a refugee/asylum system that is more conducive to getting people who need protection, but avoids the exploitation that's going on, and frankly, on both sides of the Atlantic.
Peter Van Jensen asks, when is an asylum seeker a genuine applicant? Why Haitian from Sao Paulo, Brazil, but not an Italian from Milan?
Yeah. So this is the variable standard and the variable context. When the Haitian who is coming up from Brazil would make a case, but because the credible fear test is such a low standard, 70+% of the people actually get into the next phase, which is paroled into the country. You don't have a full adjudication, and it is a low standard, and people are being, according to the standard itself, are being handled by DHS officials and let into the country. So you need to change the standard. But in the case of the Haitians this week, the expedited, it's not technically an expedited removal, they're being expelled under the Title 42, the public health restriction that was put in effect at the outset of the pandemic during 2020 and has never been revoked because it's the most effective tool. And the Biden administration, while it hasn't applied it to many families and not to unaccompanied children at all, has been using it to expel single males from Mexico and Central America. That is, single unaccompanied males have been expelled under the Title 42 without any processing. And that's the tool that's being used now to actually remove Haitians. So there's no processing and no claim. People aren't being permitted to claim asylum. They're just being removed. I'm sure that there will be advocates who will be arguing that next week, that that's an unjust avoidance of the asylum laws in this country.
My friend Gene Hanratty has asked 3 questions I'm going to combine into one. And essentially what he's saying is you're describing solutions that will take, that are medium to long-term solutions when the crisis is immediate. What can we do now?
Yeah.
I mean, what can we do now with all these people who are showing up at the border? How do we stop that now?
Well, that's why the Biden administration, I'm sure reluctantly in some quarters, because there's been a debate going on between those in the administration who recognize you need a deterrent and those who, frankly, are satisfied to operate basically open borders, responding to humanitarian needs. As I say, every one of these cases will touch at your heartstrings. But the way to deal with the immediate crisis is the way the administration is dealing with it, using Title 42 to restrict entry into the U.S., not to permit anyone to come into the U.S. to claim asylum and then be paroled into the country. And they're flying back hundreds of people. The intention here is to get the message out that the border is not open. That's what the Biden administration has not been able to do persuasively, because they've been mixing their messages almost from day one. On the Haitian issue, Secretary Mayorkas was at the border yesterday and very clearly and firmly said, everyone who has come here will be returned to Haiti. You know, that introduces a series of complications, since most of these Haitians have not been in Haiti in 10 or 12 years. And many of the children who were born in Brazil and Chile have never been in Haiti. But listen, this is why, look, we've got to have, our nation has been known for a big heart. We need to keep that big heart, but we also have to act with a brain every once in a while that says this is not sustainable. And I think that's what's happening now in terms of the administration response to this tragic situation, but it's one that's been self-inflicted. We've got to get the message out that says the border is not open. You must proceed according to the rule of law to seek entry as an immigrant. And you know, I know that puts me at odds with many in the administration, but the result has been a disaster and will be a political disaster if it's not addressed in short order.
I got a couple more questions. I actually got a lot more questions. I'm going to ask you 2 or 3 more. One, Fodero asks, overstaying tourist visas and spending lots of money to get investor visas is a different way of immigrating to the United States, both legally and illegally. In the case of overstaying the visa, it's illegal. Getting the investor visa is legal. The previous administration wanted to establish a Canada-like system of points for immigration, depending on skills and languages and age and so forth. Do you like that approach for our immigration system?
Yeah, I do. Just preliminarily, of the 11 million people, undocumented people who are here in the United States, the majority of those actually did not cross the border illegally. They came on tourist visas or other visas and overstayed them, student visas or the like. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed, that raises different enforcement issues from the ones that we're seeing at the border. But yes, in fact, you know, the EB-5 visa that permits people to make investments of hundreds of thousands of dollars and then be recognized, that's been a program that was supported by both parties and had its obvious benefits to the economy, but it was abused under both administrations as well. With regard to the point system, the last comprehensive immigration reform proposal that passed the Senate, the so-called Gang of Eight proposal, at the beginning of the second Obama term, and then was never taken up by the House, although people thought it might have passed there, but it was never taken up by the Republican caucus. That had a system very much that catered to this notion of, yes, we do need skilled workers. I mean, part of the great influx of skill and knowledge into our economies come from foreign individuals who come here, are educated in our schools, or come here seeking engineering jobs in our companies, manufacturing companies and high-tech companies. Absolutely essential. And we need to actually do that. I don't think there's a partisan divide on that. Yes, Republicans tend not to be as concerned with family reunification as Democrats do, but Democrats are not uninterested in providing skilled categories of workers. In fact, it's something that has benefited our economy greatly, and we definitely need to maintain, even though it's not been happening with the regularity as the rest of the world grows economically and technically. We have to compete for that talent now more than we ever had to.
I apologize, we've got a sound issue. It sounds like scraping against a microphone. So I'm going to try to keep my hands off my desk now and ask you to do the same thing. Somebody's making a sound. Talk to me a little bit about the Afghans whom we got out of Afghanistan, now in bases in Germany and Qatar and other places. How does the vetting for those people work? I mean, is that something we should be concerned about?
We need to be concerned about it, but there are processes in place that are very thorough and very comprehensive. And it's a canard, frankly, to say that, thousands of would-be terrorists are going to be permitted into the country. That's not the case. We've been vetting ever since the 9/11 problems, when people came in and abused their visa system that from the State Department, and led to vast reforms in the way people are vetting. The Trump administration, I think, in a very positive move, created the National Vetting Center that coordinated and consolidated many of the vetting procedures that had been put in place to deal with counterterrorism, to institute counterterrorism. So yeah, these people will be thoroughly vetted. I'm not going to touch my desk again, but a knock on wood, we haven't as a result of those procedures, and I will knock on wood because it's a continuing challenge, even though terrorism is no longer, in my view, the cornerstone of the Homeland Security mission. It's a critical one, and we've built up the capacity to vet people. We need to apply it, and it will be applied. So, part of the problem we have here is that there was a blundered effort based on faulty intelligence at the outset of this. And unfortunately, the administration has not countered to make clear that it did a magnificent job. I mean, compared to the situation we faced in Vietnam, getting 116,000 Afghan men and women who assisted this country over a 20-year stay in our longest war. This was a critical effort that, frankly, in my view, should have been applied to the Kurds who did the same thing during the Iraqi war and were ignored by the Trump administration. This is an obligation we have, a moral obligation, and it was met. But everybody, nobody remembers past the first day, and that's a fault of the public affairs effort here. But it was a magnificent effort, and one that I think put President Biden in good standing, even if nobody knows that his administration has actually accomplished this. But to then attack it by saying, "Oh, it's a sieve or a hole for terrorism," is really inconsistent with the vetting processes in place.
Okay, so now, when you've got the center at Harvard that you're working with, you're speaking to the World Affairs Council here, you've written your article. How do we create the political will to move toward what you're advocating, which would reform the system, reduce the backlog in adjudicating asylum claims, and process asylum claims offshore, not on the U.S.-Mexico border? How do we get there from here?
Yeah.
And that's my final question.
Yeah. So Mr. Ambassador, I recognize, as you do, that we're in the most divided political era in our country's history since the 1850s, that ultimately culminated in the war between those who believed in slavery and those who did not, in the Civil War. And I'm not suggesting, and I hope to goodness that we, and I don't think
Alan, you have frozen for me. Anna, is it just me, or is he frozen?
He's frozen.
Okay. While we're waiting for Alan to come back, and hopefully he will, I want to thank everybody and they're great questions. I toned down some of them because they're clearly, people got strong views here. So I want to, and rightly so. I mean, this is an issue about which we all feel very strongly on unfortunately, on all 16 sides of the issue. It's complicated, and there's no short, easy answers. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I urge all of you to join and support your local World Affairs Council. If you don't have one near you, we have a digital membership, so you can join the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. We're going to post this video on YouTube this afternoon. Please share it with your friends. And we've got some upcoming programs I want to tell you about. On Thursday at 10:30 a.m., we've got a program with David Rennie The Economist magazine bureau chief in Beijing. Title of the program is The View from Beijing. A lot of stuff's been going on. This will be a great time. Please join us on Thursday. Then next week on the 27th, we've got a Brexit update with Davy Young and Neil Walsh, on the UK post-Brexit. It's for members only, so there'll only be a small number of people, and you'll be able to ask your question directly. So join the World Affairs Council. And then a week from Thursday on the 30th, we have Constanze Stelzenmüller from the Brookings Institution on the German elections. We're doing this together with the American Council on Germany and the Halle Foundation here in Atlanta. Please join us for that. And then on, Hannah, correct me, it's October 8th. We've got the Mexican ambassador to the United States, Esteban Moctezuma, for our first in-person program. The registration link is live now at our website. Please sign up for that. If you're in Atlanta, this is going to be great. It's going to be our first back in-person program, a lunch at the Commerce Club in downtown Atlanta. I want to thank Laura Brower, our social media and marketing manager, and Hina Rini, the executive producer. You heard her voice in the background, who's making all this work. And above all, I want to thank Alan Bersin. I mean, if you've not done so, please read his article. We'll send it to you again. It's got a lot of great ideas in there, and as in all public policy issues, getting from the idea to getting a law passed that will put these things in place is going to be a great challenge. It's going to require all of us. It's not going to be easy. And like all public policy issues, it will require compromise. Thank you. Everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you on Thursday. We'll talk to David Rennie. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.